Blackballed. 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 What is up, everybody? My name is James D. Fiore, and this is Blackballed. I have been accused of being a fence sitter since as long as I can remember. One guy really irritated me when I worked for Huffington Post, and he told me that the idea of never taking a side on the right or the left was a trope in and of itself, which I think is ridiculous. I think it's so important, and I think it's really the defining issue of our times is polarization, that big overarching issue. And it makes me so happy when I see people writing about this, because I think it's really an understated problem. And that is when I saw a post that had this: Plaidoyer Pour L'extrême Centre by Hélène Buzzetti, because I don't want to fuck up the accents. And I just want to read something before we introduce her. It's true that the average citizen does not identify with either the identity left or the populist right. And this is what partly explains the popularity of François Legault, because he understood the need for a political offer more or less at the center in the population. But the fact remains that the public forum is well and truly fueled by these two extremes, which respond to each other. And it upsets everyone. And it creates two fringes of society that are at odds with the rest. Please welcome my guest today, and her name is Hélène Buzzetti. Yes, I did it.
Good evening, James.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We joked off air that I'm a product of a golden horseshoe French education. Like, I don't know. I barely know what pamplemousse means anymore. And that's an affront to Canada, because I was born in Montreal too. It gets worse.
Oh,
I know.
I get you.
That's right. I saw a random tweet, and it was in French, and I translated it. And it was someone else that had quote tweeted you, I believe. And it was about your book. And I was like, it was like getting a B12 shot. I felt energized, because I just really think that it is really a super important issue. And I was wondering why now, because it has sort of been permeating, I guess, for a while.
Yeah.
And how worried are you that it will that society will continue to go down that road rather than repair itself?
Well, I hope it would repair, but I don't think we have gone to the extreme of this tendency yet. I think we will see more polarization before we recover from it. And why, you're asking me why now? I've actually been thinking about this for quite some time now. I've been a reporter for 25 years or so, been noticing these tendencies, and I wanted to talk about this, but I didn't quite know how to start this topic. What was my lead, essentially? And then came the trucker convoy in January, February, and I thought that was exactly what I needed to illustrate what I wanted to say, because for me, the trucker convoy has been an illustration of the mediatic dynamics or processes that are at play, and which fuel, in my sense, this polarization. The fact that we label people right off the bat, either you're left or right, you're federalist or separatist, you're a nationalist or a multiculturalist. We have all those sorts of dichotomies in society, and they're easy. They make it easy to think, but what they really do is put people in small boxes, and we don't really listen to what they have to say anymore. We just judge them on the basis of what label they wear. And we did exactly that with the truckers. What triggered me was really from the day one or even day zero of this trucker convoy, I was reading columnists, or francophone columnists. I have to say that I was looking really at French media. And francophone columnists, right from the bat, they just said these people were a bunch of deplorables, and everything went according that mindset in the following day. So we were not really listening to what they had to say. We were just saying, okay, they're deplorables, so we don't listen to them at all. We just judge them. And that's part of the process that leads to this polarization. And in part, I mean, people who feel they're not listened to, well, they tend to yell louder. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting because before the pandemic, the anti-vaxxer, I'll just do the air quote thing, was largely represented by the Robert Kennedy Jr. kind of faction, where the autism rumor was first, discovered in what turned out to be, I believe, a fraudulent paper or something. But the damage had been done because people were motivated by like the health of their kids. And it was really tough to untie that thing that they had tied for like a decade, listening to these things that didn't turn out to be true. So when the convoy happened, I think I agree with you. All I saw was villainization of people that didn't get vaccinated or were vaccine hesitant. The Star had that deliberately hyperbolic cover where it was a quote. It was hard to tell who it was from, but basically saying, I don't care if you die if you didn't get vaccinated, which is just and did you have trouble criticizing the left as part of your book? Because I find that the left, one drawback on them, if I were to look at it from the outside in, is that they often suffer from an infallibility complex where they know the righteousness of an issue, and anything that isn't that is the N-word, basically.
Well, there are a few things to unpack there. First of all, you're talking about anti-vaxxers, and I think it was larger than that at this trucker convoy. It was more about all the how do you say that, sanitary measures, the health measures, right?
Yeah, the health measures. Yeah,
the health measures. Sorry. Probably that those people who were in Ottawa in January, February, they were probably opposed to health measures right from day one of the pandemic, which was probably super irresponsible in my view. But we were 2 years later. Most people who wanted to be vaccinated had been vaccinated more than once, probably even 3 times by that time. And provinces were starting to abandon some of those health measures because we were saying that they were not as useful anymore to control the pandemic. We were shifting paradigm, and it was okay. Everybody did that around the world. But Mr. Trudeau, for political/electoral reasons, he was just out of an election in which he used the health measures, the pandemic, as a wedge issue against Erin O'Toole. He was for the vaccine mandates as opposed to Mr. O'Toole, who said, well, you should get vaccinated, but we will not impose any mandates. So Mr. Trudeau had to keep that line. So in January, when all provinces were dropping those health measures, Mr. Trudeau was imposing new ones, and it didn't make any scientific sense. There was no specialist who said that we needed that measure at the border for truckers, and yet they went ahead with it. And that's probably the trigger point of all this. That's why people were so angry. So probably that those people were opposed to measures on day one of the pandemic, which I think was irresponsible at the time. But 2 years later, they were probably saying the same thing they had been saying for the past 2 years, but their time had come. They had a point at that time, but because we had decided way back that they were deplorables, that their position was not a good one, we didn't listen to what they had to say. But the paradigm had changed, and we should have acknowledged that maybe they had a point 2 years later on.
Yeah, I've kind of felt that way since the beginning, that the people that associated themselves with that movement were caricaturized, by the media. And I know of people that went to the convoy protest and were like, we have no idea what the media is talking about. Like, we were there for 4 days and we walked all around or whatever. And it's not like we didn't see anything, but it was like not, largely peaceful. And people don't like it when you make a point like that. Like and I'll say it anyways, because I don't care. But the idea that, like, if the convoy had burned down like 3 city blocks of shops, like they did in cities in the United States during Black Lives Matter protests or George Floyd murder protests, it would be like insurrection, and it would be treason, it would be capital crimes and and but it's not really how you protest anymore, is it? It's what you're protesting, right? Like, there's a hypocrisy built into that, isn't there?
I think there is, and let me be clear. I'm not defending the truckers. I'm not defending the fact that they remained there for 3.5 weeks. I live in the region. I know how it made people's lives miserable, especially people living downtown. It was unacceptable. I accept that the pandemic was something so exceptional that demonstrating against the health measures, the demonstration itself, excuse me, could be exceptional as well. So yeah, maybe you want to demonstrate for 3, 4, maybe 5 days, but I think that after that you should have gone home. So I want to be clear about this. I'm not defending the whole thing, but I have to recognize that we haven't been fair with these people. Yes, some had weird ideas. Some did things that were unacceptable, like honking horns, like in the middle of the night in neighborhoods where people were trying to get asleep. That was unacceptable.
That was actually the touchstone, I thought. The if you just removed the trucks, like 80% of your problems go away. Keep the people there.
Well, the protest would still be there, but without the honk, without the horns, that would be much more acceptable.
It also destroys World Cup games. Those horns in the bleachers. Like, what is that sound? It sounds like a spirit cow is just in the sky all the time.
I don't know, but
yeah.
So anyway, I'm just saying that we didn't listen to what they were actually saying, and I think that's part of the problem. Now we don't listen so much to what people say, but we judge people on. We don't judge what people say. We judge who says it. So if you're deemed to be an acceptable person, then we listen to what you have to say. But if you're deemed to be a deplorable person, then we don't listen to what you have to say. And sometimes, Jean Chrétien, a former prime minister, he used to say, even a broken clock indicates the right time twice a day. And it was a way for him to say that even your worst enemies can sometimes have 1 or 2 good ideas, and you should pay attention to those. And I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that maybe you can criticize those people who were downtown in Ottawa for many, many things, but they had a point at that time about the necessity to reduce the health measures, or to only keep those who were actually keeping us safe, and get away with all the others that were making some people's lives miserable. And we didn't listen to them because we put that label, deplorable, and then we stopped listening. And I use this example in my book just to open up the debate, because this is not a book about the truckers' convoy. It's a book about polarization. And I'm trying to say that this is a process that's happening all the time. We label people, we judge them, and then if we have decided that they're not good people, then we just don't listen to what they have to say. So everything gets caricatured, and therefore everything's being seen either in a black and white reality, and we forget and we erase all the gray tones, and that's why we get this polarization, because there's only 2 camps that exist, whereas people are all over the map.
It's interesting how keywords. This is like I smoke weed, so sometimes I think of really crazy stuff, and this is one of those things, which is that I feel like I feel like our brains are now like search engine optimization software. And when we hear certain words or phrases, we just have this subconscious reflex that says, oh, that guy said free speech, alt-right, or that guy said, we just want to distribute this money, that commie, or whatever, right? And there's
It's exactly
countless.
what I'm saying.
And when you just said deplorable, the first thing I thought was like Hillary Clinton during her campaign.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, right. But it's interesting how keywords, and sometimes they're innocuous like that one, but sometimes I think they do people a disservice. Like, a whole generation of people growing up not understanding that free speech is a bedrock of left-wing orthodoxy, born at Berkeley. And like, because someone else says that they are, they take a certain position, and just the autopilot kicks in and you just take the opposite position, and it's infuriating. And a lot of people don't realize they're doing it, I don't think.
And the entire media the media are doing it, and the entire public forum is built around that, around those automatic reflection or thinking, because it's easier. Let's face it, it's easier than to explain in details and with all the nuances what someone really means. It's easier to say, oh, Hélène Buzzetti, okay, she's a separatist, she's a leftist, or she's a whatever. Put the labels you want to put on me. I don't mind. And it's easier. You don't have to think about what I actually say. You just look the labels, and then you can make your mind. Like you say, it's like a computer, but it's not real thinking. And that explains our problem. And I talk about the media because this book is about my profession. That's what I do. I'm a reporter, and I'm proud to be a reporter. I don't buy into those, conspiracy theories that, the media, because they get subsidized by the government, they're not doing their job properly. I don't think that's the explanation. I think one of the explanation why we act or do our job this way is that, first of all, there's fear. We're afraid. As a reporter, when you cover whatever topic, that there's this obvious angle that's being proposed by the government or whatever the group is, you're reporting on, and you could think of other angles, sometimes more uncomfortable angles, or things that are less obvious but need to be talked about again. But you won't do it because you know that if you do it, there's probably an army of trolls on social media that will call you a lot of names, and you just don't want to do this. So you go with the flow. You just stick to the I'm looking for my word here, but you just stick with the plan, what's being offered to you. Another reason is laziness. I'm not very charitable in saying this, but reporters have crazy days. It's hectic. We have to do lots of things. Sometimes you have to cover 1, 2, even 3 events in a day. So you don't have time to wander off with different angles. You don't have time to look for different professors who might have a different angle on your topic. So again, you just go with the flow. There's also emotion. We have this tendency of apprehending all topics from an emotional angle. We talk to people. What's your personal story? How do you feel? So it's very difficult to oppose to emotion some rational thinking. I give the example of drugs. There are more and more drugs that are very expensive that are being subsidized by our governments. I talk about one in my book, which costs $700,000 a year per patient. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So one could argue that, hey, with that amount of money, we could save much more lives doing something else than just providing to this one patient. But how can you say that this rational thinking when you're in front of the person who is actually dying, who needs that drug? It says, hey, that's my life you're talking about. There's no way you can compete with that. But that all explains why we don't confront as much as before some of the ideas being put forward in the public forum.
Yeah, we have and it goes from civilian all the way up to CEOs and politicians and everybody, a profound fear of optics. to the point where like often press releases are laughable, and I don't, even I right now don't want to delve into the topic, so I'll just be ambiguous intentionally. But John Tory did an announcement on International Day of Menstruation or something, and never used the word women in the entire press release as an intentional strategy to show that he was an ally or whatever. And it was just like, oh my God, like, and I'm saying, oh my God, not because I don't want to like progress, but because it doesn't feel authentic, and therefore it's not resonating. Right. And I'm wondering if how much of our left and right fringes are these like astroturfed kind of like group of people that aren't really pushing the needle in either direction, but they're just parroting, and why that's important.
But just think of what happened to J.K. Rowling, because she said whatever she said about that particular topic.
I'm not allowed to say her name on the network because I used to bring it up every podcast on my.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
I'd ask every guest, how do you feel about J.K. Rowling? And I had one politician that went like this. Well, I don't really know what she said, but she's absolutely transphobic.
Well, that's the thing, because she's been labeled transphobic. So you can't support her anymore because you will be, labeled as such yourself. But there are lots of people who might think the same way she did, or, to some degree. But if you say so, you're going to be, as I said, criticized, ostracized on social media. So you won't go there. So as a reporter, you would receive that press release from John Tory, which I haven't seen, by the way. But I know in Ottawa, there was a similar debate, and Ottawa, the federal government did the same thing. They didn't mention women when it was about something that's really womanly. And if as a reporter, you want to raise that up and mention that, you will be criticized. So sometimes
they'll call you Ezra Levant or something.
You don't want to be, it's not because you want to be on the side of the government that you want to be nice with the government. It's just that you're afraid. Let's face it. I know these people, reporters are my friend. That's what I am. I meet people who are reporters all the time. We're afraid. You just don't want to go there. You say, oh, you know what? Forget it. I won't talk about it because I'm going to start a shitstorm and I don't feel like it today. And that's what's happening. It's part of the process. We are afraid. So there are some topics that we don't raise anymore because of that.
Is it a weird feeling to leave out important stories because of the stress that would be involved with it, so that of something that no one else knows? And does it feel kind of like, like you're helpless, or you're just frustrated and you just, it's.
I wouldn't say it's as much as leaving a story as, not covering an angle. Like, you talk about this story from John Tory, and then you would say, oh, by the way, he doesn't talk about women. You could add that to your piece, but that by doing so, you bring all the J.K. Rowling stuff.
Yeah.
You'll feel like it's not.
Sorry, go ahead.
Covering it. It's just that there's some aspect of the topic that you're not dealing with.
Yeah. One event that comes to mind immediately is the Megan Murphy, when she was speaking at a Toronto Public Library branch, and they wanted to stop her from speaking. She's the former editor of Feminist Current, and she had dead named, I think the term is, Jessica Yaniv. She called him Jonathan, and she was banned from Twitter for life. And anyway, she was going to do a talk at a library branch, and a bunch of people came and tried to stop the event. She was able to sort of do it, but they disrupted it and kind of ruined it. And then John Tory spoke out against her, and the librarian had to step up and be like, she's never been charged with a crime, let alone a hate crime. On what possible grounds could I ever? And people defer to the emotion a lot more now than I've ever seen before, because they'll be, it doesn't matter, she's a hateful person. That's their argument.
Right. But and all this is right. And I want to be clear that I think that process happens on both sides, because lots of people will say that it's the radical left that does that. And indeed, it does that. But also the right does that, in a different way, but by calling fake news all the time and saying, don't listen to the media, they're just a bunch of liars. It's the same process of trying to cancel the speech of some people, of some segments of the population. So I think what in my book, what I talk about is it's both sides are wrong. It's not just, the problem is not just on the left, it's also on the right. And we should stop doing this. And what I'm saying is that both are responding to one another, because there's an extreme one, the other one gets more and more extreme as well. So in a society, everyone tends to position themselves in a way to make a counterbalance, essentially,
Yeah. Can I circle back to something you said earlier about the way that I totally just lost my train of thought. Did you see that? It just escaped right out
That's
of my brain.
marijuana, man.
No. Sorry. That's so funny. When you were talking about the way that media digests stories and the way that we report stories, is there any sense in being optimistic that things like big tech can stop sort of enhancing the problem through algorithms and things like that? Like, are we able to pinpoint any technological reasons for part of our polarization? I guess.
Well, you're talking to a techno, what we call in French, a techno nul. I'm a zero.
Oh, me too.
Technology. So I will certainly not try to answer that question from that angle. But I think that reporters themselves are part of the solution. And we have to rediscover some sense of courage. We have to disinvest ourselves from it and see ourselves like just messengers. And as messengers, we will always be criticized. That's part of the job, and that's okay. You have to accept that. And you have to find yourself some courage to say things that are difficult, say things that will make people think. But when you think about Socrates, Socrates was put to death just because he was trying to make people think outside the box, think differently from the mainstream thinking of the time, and he was put to death to it. Making people think never makes you popular. That's part of the job, but you have to wear that, and you have to know when you want to become a reporter that's part of the job, and you just do it, and you just don't watch Twitter as much if you can't stand the trolls. But I think I don't know what the tech companies can do. They probably have one solution that's possible. I don't know about it, but I know what I can do as a reporter, and what we can do as reporters is to show more courage.
Yeah, and that would be great. Because they have kind of let us down. Like there are the tiptoeing and the deference to certain issues, if it's and that's on conservative and progressive kind of publications, and everything seems so artificial, and the apathetic middle must be massive. I don't really know how big the middle is in this country, but I'm assuming it's at least 60-70% or something like that. Do you know that number? Like, of people that either don't identify with anything or identify as a moderate?
I don't know, but what I would say about the media, there's a tendency when you look at like I said, the Trumpists in the United States, the Gilets jaunes in French, and the truckers in here, the media, treated all this in the same way. We have difficulties understanding those movements and relating to those movements and the values put forward by those movements. And this leads to large segments of the population who don't trust us anymore, the media and the reporters. And I think we have to be concerned about that. Why is it that such a large constituency of the population don't relate to what we do. Like I said, I don't buy into those conspiracy theories. I don't agree with Polyev or Mr. Scheer depicting the media as enemies of the people. I don't buy into it. I'm a reporter. I like my job. I think my job is important. But I think we have to look ourselves in the mirror, and maybe there are things that we don't do the good way or the better way, and we have to think about that. And I think the fact that we earn a good living, the fact that we have usually university degrees, so we socialize with other people like us who have university degrees, that cuts us off from large segment of the population and their values and their vision of the world. And we have to be conscious of that. It's like an ingrained bias, a social bias. And that probably explains why there are some phenomenons that we don't understand.
That thought that earlier escaped on a cloud of marijuana smoke, it came back. The media fund I wanted to talk to you about. I have no idea what kinds of cause and effect situations have taken place or not because of this media fund. But when I just look at it theoretically, it feels like there must be some sort of percentage of media outlets that are trying to play nice so that they don't disrupt the funding. I don't know if that's true, but it feels like just probability. It must be a little bit true. Like,
I don't agree with that, but go on.
Okay, sure. But more importantly, I think is that there might be Pierre Poilievre might be prime minister one day, and then what happens to the fund then, and where do the things get directed to then? It kind of reminds me, on a much different type of scale, of the National Defense Authorization Act that Obama implemented in the States, where he could legally kill American citizens without due process if they were deemed to be a terrorist threat. And all I kept on thinking was, what if a crazy, like war hawk, Republican has that power and uses it? Like, it's always the unintended, the blowback of future administrations. I don't know what's going to happen to this media fund. It will probably remain, but it feels like it's just another problem that we're going to now have to deal with. And I don't know how to solve it, but I don't know if that was the right, way to do it. I know that it's a tough spot for you to really
I'm not sure. I would bet that if Mr. Poilievre gets elected, this fund will disappear. I don't think the media will continue to be subsidized. On the contrary, I think that subsidization, which happens at the provincial Quebec level, by the way, the Quebec government did something similar. I think that's part of the solution. What I explain in my book is that the economic model of journalism has just collapsed with, dematerial. Do you say that? Anyway, the fact that we are all web-based and, you don't need the paper anymore, etc. So people don't subscribe. They don't pay for the information. The people have taken for granted that information is free. They don't want to pay for it. And that created a lot of uncertainty in the media. And I think that explains why they have become so interested by extreme stories, because that's what makes that's what make people click on your story. It brings money. So on the contrary, I think that not having a regular revenues makes media more inclined to publish extreme stories, things that are flashy, sexy, controversial. And whereas if you provide a stable a fund, a stable stream of revenues, maybe they will be a little bit more they will pause a little bit, or a little bit sober in their coverage. So I see this personally as maybe be part of the solution. I don't buy into the fact that the media are play nice to the government because of those funds, but I don't think they will remain if Mr. Poilievre gets elected.
Do you think there's a resentment that veteran reporters at, say, legacy outlets or mid to bigger outlets have for bloggers and some freelancers they don't always play by journalism, like the rules of journalism, and they jump the gun maybe. I am completely guilty of all of those things, but sometimes it feels like they won't do the story because it was broken in untraditional media and by a person who's relatively unknown, and it becomes very frustrating to kind of look at the journalism as an industry or as a business, because it kind of manifests in people kind of feeling like their ego wasn't checked, and they don't want to do the story because a blogger did it. I've seen it. I've been at the receiving end of it, and I just wonder if that's the right approach, and why they can't work together with the blogosphere or whatever you want to call it these days.
I don't think I would be able to answer that because I've never witnessed such a case. I think part of the answer to it is, there's so much information nowadays that we have to check that, we usually don't see the blogs and all that. Because there's a lot of this other info that you just don't have time to process because your day is already a maelstrom. But of course, I mean, the mainstream media, they're trying to apply some criteria, some principles, and sometimes, yes, it's frustrating to see that some people might not play by the book. I understand the frustration, but I haven't thought about this much, so I wouldn't say anything.
I like to ask people random questions just to take the risk.
That's okay. I just admit that I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I would love to talk to you longer. I know you have to go.
Sorry about that.
I would no, that's okay. I would love to read the translated one of. Go ahead.
Plaidoyer pour l'extrême centre.
Thank you. God, I'm such an illiterate.
For extreme center.
I am everything Francophones hate in other Canadians. Like, I'm just like so bad at it. And there's no excuse. Mademoiselle Langlois, if you're listening, you were a good teacher. So, but I do appreciate the time. I will read that book. And thank you very much for coming on Blackballed. I appreciate it.
That was my pleasure. Thank you very much, James, for having me.
No problem at all. I'd love to have you
again.
Have
a good day.
Yeah, you too. I couldn't read even excerpts of the book because, there was a couple there, because it was in French and I couldn't find an English version of it. But the language is just familiar to me. She's clearly a lot more, academic, a lot smarter than I am. I'm more of a, stand on a soapbox and finger wag kind of commentator when it comes to polarization. But she's a seasoned reporter of 25 years and has seen it for sort of, multidimensional because, she works in media. She knows what it's like to be a civilian, and politics is something that she's covered. And those three things embody the right ingredients to sort of become a underpinning of polarization. That reflex to just not say this, or that reflex to only say that. No one really listened to the criticism for a long time of the left because of polarization, because they would be like, oh, listen to that fucking Tucker Carlson over there just said something, and it could have been totally reasonable, but Tucker said it. I found her fascinating. I think, I do think it's one of the top three overarching issues of our time, because, dude, this is how civil war starts to germinate, right? Like, this is the way it. If there's a civil war in 50 years, this was definitely a domino. The polarization of society itself inside North America, and the electing of a rodeo clown with orange hair and no soul, and the Tea Party and Antifa, and the thing that happened in Portland, and free speech being an alt-right issue instead of a regular liberal progressive issue. And you can't say Jonathan Yaniv because his name's Jessica now, even though you don't really think he's trans, but just is using the trans identity that he's co-opting so he can further victimize women, which is what he did his whole life before this. we are erring on the side of, we want to be nice to people before we want to actually apply some sort of like logic or structure to an argument. And it's that infallibility thing. She's fascinating, and I would like to have her back. So I am having an interesting week this week. On December 5th, I have Megan Murphy. On December 4th, I have, what do you call her? Carrie Ruddick. I think that's it. From the Ukraine. And the week after that is going to be kind of explosive. I'm taking a break from explosive stuff. David Wallace isn't allowed on the podcast for at least another 3 days, so I can decompress from the 8,000 things that have happened in the last 3 episodes that he's been on. But the fix is happening soon, and we are going to make an announcement shortly regarding launch date and a couple of other details. Needless to say, David is working behind the scenes, hooking up guests, and we're working together trying to figure out format. And it's going to be one of the greatest podcasts ever. And the best part is I can say all of the details of the idea out loud in public without the fear of anyone stealing the idea. Is because in order to steal the idea, they would have to literally steal David Wallace or find somehow another political fixer that wants to blow the whistle and ruin his life, which I doubt is going to happen. So this podcast is a one of a kind. There are no other podcasts that have a political fixer turned whistleblower and whatever the fuck I am. But most importantly, David, there's no one like him. There's no competitor. We have a monopoly on the ex-political fixer genre, and I think we're going to flex that for all it's worth. There are going to be a ton of really interesting shows on the Brethren as well. There's going to be a couple announcements regarding possible documentary. I am doing a pod series on sort of the Richard Marsh, David Wallace web and how their life paths converged. And it's going to be kind of a crazy December, and I can't wait. And thank you for joining us today. And this was one of the worst rambles at the end of the show ever. And yeah, I guess I'm a little stoned, but I've done 16 podcasts in 15 days, and I think I deserved a little R&R. And we'll see you next time on Blackballed.
Blackballed. Blackballed. Blackballed.